All right, welcome. In this explainer, we're going to dive into the foundational neurobiology of psychiatric disorders. Our whole goal here is to break down the science in a way that you can actually use in clinical practice, starting from the brain's tiniest parts and building our way up to the big, complex systems.
Think about it. Behind every single decision a psychiatrist makes, what drug to prescribe, how to even think about a patient's case, what to tell a family about the future, it all comes down to this one fundamental question. This is really what's pushing modern psychiatry forward, taking us from just listing symptoms to actually understanding them.
And this quote right here, it just nails the massive shift happening in our field. See, it's not enough anymore to just memorize a checklist of symptoms. We have to understand the biological machinery underneath. Knowing the why behind the what, that's what lets us be more precise, more effective, and it completely changes how we approach taking care of our patients.
Okay, so to really get a grip on all these complex mechanisms, we've got to start small. I mean, really small. We're talking about the brain's most fundamental building block, the tiny messenger that does all the heavy lifting.
So just how many are we talking about? Get this, 86 billion. That's the best estimate for the number of neurons packed inside the human brain. Every single one is a specialized little information processor, and all together, they create the most complex network we know of.
So a neuron is basically the brain's workhorse. It's this unique little cell that's built to send information using this really cool mix of electrical and chemical signals. And the whole thing works because of its three key parts.
And here's how they all work together. You've got the cell body, that's the command center. Then you have the dendrites, which act like these little antennas catching all the incoming signals. And the axon, that's the long cable that sends the signal out. But the real magic, the basis for every thought, every feeling, that happens in the tiny space where one neuron's axon gets super close to another's dendrite.
You know, a single neuron is powerful, for sure, but it's the conversation between them that creates the symphony of the mind. And this conversation, you can think of it like a synaptic handshake, happens at this very special place called the synapse.
This is it, the communication hub. It's this incredibly tiny gap, and the process of sending a message across it is the foundation for, well, everything. How we think, how we feel, how we act. It's like a perfectly timed chemical ballet. And this shows that ballet perfectly. An electrical signal zips down the axon, and that arrival triggers the release of these chemical messengers we call neurotransmitters. They float across that tiny gap, and then, click, they lock into receptors on the next neuron, just like a key in a lock. The message is delivered, and the signal keeps on going.
Now, for clinical practice, this is a massively important takeaway. The synapse is ground zero. It's the main target for most psychiatric medications. The drugs we use are designed to mess with this process. So something like an SSRI, it blocks the cleanup crew, the reuptake pumps, which leaves more serotonin hanging around in the synapse. Other drugs, like a lot of antipsychotics, they physically block the receptors, so the dopamine message can't get through. Understanding these different strategies is really the core of psychopharmacology.
Okay, so we've zoomed way in on that tiny, fundamental connection. Now let's pull the camera back. Let's look at the bigger picture. Because it's not just about one synapse, it's about how billions of them get organized into these massive, functional systems. Now, the brain has over 100 different neurotransmitters, but in psychiatry, these 5 are the major players. Dopamine is huge for psychosis and addiction, but it's also involved in Parkinson's. Serotonin is a key player in mood and anxiety. Norepinephrine, that handles our stress and attention systems. And then you have GABA and glutamate, which are basically the brain's main off and on switches. In fact, understanding glutamate is a huge reason we're seeing new rapid-acting antidepressants like ketamine.
And this brings us to a really critical idea for modern practice. It's almost never about a single chemical being just too high or too low. Instead, these chemicals work within these huge organized networks called neural circuits. For example, there's a loop called the CSTC circuit that helps regulate our behavior. When that circuit gets hyperactive and stuck on repeat, it can show up as the intrusive thoughts and compulsions you see in OCD. Or think about anxiety disorders. We often see a communication breakdown between the amygdala, the brain's threat detector, and the prefrontal cortex, which is supposed to hit the brakes. The amygdala is screaming danger, and the prefrontal cortex just can't calm it down.
And that really leads us to the ultimate question. How does this simple, elegant, little handshake at the synapse, when you repeat it billions and billions of times across all these complex circuits, give rise to everything we experience? How does it create the whole symphony of the human mind? And what happens when that symphony goes out of tune? Well, understanding that is the next step on our journey.
and we're going to start to unravel it in part 2.